All right, welcome to this bonus episode of the Corona Cinema podcast, and it's essentially just going to have a discussion about kind of the racial issues that are pervading the world, I guess, at the moment, and kind of frame it around. Since this is a movie podcast, we're going to kind of frame it around The Hate You Give, which was released in 2018, directed by George Tillman Jr., a screenplay by Audrey Wells, who actually died the day before the film was released, which is quite sad. And it's based on a novel by Angie Thomas. And that novel, she wrote that like kind of inspired by the shooting of Oscar Grant, which that murder was the basis of a film, Fruitvale Station, directed by Ryan Coogler, starring Michael B. Jordan a few years ago. So another racially motivated attack. And yeah, it's an interesting film, a kind of more emotional film than when I first watched it, I think, because of the context of what's going on now. Like, obviously, this is not a new struggle, so to speak, but the protests weren't as, not the word aggressive is the wrong word, but kind of weren't as big at that particular time. So I didn't feel the weight of the movie quite as much. And I had a few issues with it, like the Anthony Mackie performance and stuff like that, which kind of held me back from just the film as like a pure bit of filmmaking. But in terms of the message from the film, it kind of hit me a bit more this time with the context of what's going on. And I remember watching it came out in this country with a Cineworld Unlimited screening, and I remember it was one of those where it was one of the baseball no, like the unseen unlimited screenings. And when it became clear that it was like when it came up that it was The Hate You Give, like I've never seen that many at an unseen unlimited screening. I've never seen that many people walk out. Like, could give them the benefit of the doubt and say they just weren't interested. They were expecting maybe like Star is Born or something at that time. But I feel like there's another section of people who don't like to be lectured to, and that's kind of a significant issue within this country. They don't want to accept that there are racial issues that still exist within this country, and it's stemmed from this country. That's why it's so like dominant in America, and obviously America's different circumstances with the way the police operate and guns and things. But I think there's still attitudes in this country that need to be resolved. So yeah, that's kind of introduction into the film. But the film's just kind of a framework to have like a general discussion with myself, Liam Waite, and joining me is Mason and Ross, who are usually on the podcast. Hi guys.
You're right.
Good evening.
So yeah, I feel like I'll just pass it to you, Mason, to start with, to give your thoughts about the situation that you've been out protesting today in Birmingham. What kind of motivated you to go do that?
Well, I feel like I've always been willing to have this sort of conversation with people and challenge people with sort of racist beliefs and racist ideas. And I've always been quite up for, I guess, educating people who I've obviously found out don't want to be educated. But at the same time, people who are genuinely ready for a conversation, I'm always happy to do that with people. And since this has all been going on, obviously within America, and then you've seen the impact it's had sort of over the world, I felt like I was doing myself a disservice to how I feel and how vocal and how passionate I feel about the whole situation in general to not do anything about it. So I was sort of like racking my brain as to what I could do sort of in my like perspective of being privileged, what I can do to make an impact or make a difference on the whole situation. That's why I thought it was really important for me to go to the protest in Birmingham today. It was really mad for me because I've never been to a protest before myself. First time I've ever been to anything like that, and the weight of like what I was witnessing was just sort of like, it was incredible to me, to where you're seeing so many passionate people and everyone who's there for the same reason and everyone who has the sort of same mindset as you is all being so passionate and so like promoting of bringing attention to all of these issues. And the main thing that I sort of picked up from the protest is that this is more than just the George Floyd murder. This is highlighting the issues, but not just in America, but within the UK, because there seems to be this sort of idea that the UK is innocent in racism, and it's always being referred to as not that bad. And I think that's something that people need to start having that discussion about, to understand that that's simply just not the case. And what I found amazing about today was that it wasn't just sort of chanting or anything like that. It was accounts of people from like Birmingham and around the area, all people of color, just sharing their experiences of what they've had to deal with from a range of ages. There was a girl who like discussed her experience of racism at the age of 13, and the whole thing was just so impactful. And I feel like people should go out and protest, and they should go to those events, especially white people, because we're sort of hidden and shrouded from these from these experiences ourselves. But when you get to when you get to listen to it firsthand with such emotion from people, and surrounded by so many people of color who are trying to get a message across, it was so effective, like for me. And that's someone who obviously, like, I feel like I would obviously never understand the situation, but for me, as someone who can like comprehend sort of what's going on, even to me, I had to take a step back from how sort of moving the whole thing was. So yeah, it was like incredible for me, really.
So thinking about the hate you give, it follows Amanda Stenberg's character who witnesses her friend being shot by a policeman. Now he's unarmed when he was shot by a policeman, and it kind of follows like her journey. Like she kind of has to. She obviously witnessed it, so she has to kind of summon the strength to fight back, even though it's tough. Like you have the Anthony Mackie like kind of side plot, which I don't really like. Like I don't really necessarily needed that. Like she could have just been trying to like find a way to be a voice of change without having the idea of like getting attacked by gangs or whatever. But yeah, whatever. But yeah, it's like she's trying to become a voice for change, and she's got to kind of embrace both sides of her life, because you have like her life within the white school, then the life within her black neighborhood, and she needs to combine those in order to become this voice for change. And it's about understanding that you can make a difference. And like you said, like you were wondering how you could influence things. And from my perspective, like I've done you signed like all the petitions and stuff, and we're having this discussion just because we might as well have a few views. Might not necessarily going to have a load of people listening, but at least this some other way of another outlet to kind of show how we feel. I'm thinking about like my experiences as a mixed race person. Like, I've never had like any like extreme racism or anything. Like nothing overt. But obviously I moved to Welling at the start of year 7, and like going from like multicultural London to Welling, where there was like 5 or 6, maybe a few more like ethnic people in our year, and like, I was never like I'm never really like phased by anything. But there were comments like people would be like Black Leon or stuff like that, or people made like those kind of jokes about like having like a big dick and shit like that. Stuff that doesn't really like, it's just like water off a duck's back or whatever. Like I don't really care. But in hindsight, if I was more like educated, I'd be like, no, you shouldn't really say that, because other people will take that the wrong way. And by having those views at that age could lead you to hate more as you get older. And so that's kind of like my like personal feelings. Like never had experience in anything too hard, but it's just like little comments where you can see people aren't paying attention to the effect their language can have and could have on someone else who's not like strong, but someone who's a bit more vulnerable. Ross, what are your feelings on the protests that are going on at this point?
I mean, I think, like, if you go back to the film, it kind of foreshadows in a way that the USA especially, but the whole world was just kind of one event away from kind of breaking point and riots and stuff. I mean, of course, there's this kind of injustice has been happening to many people over many years, but it's this one which is finally broken through, I think, and given everyone a voice. I mean, protesting is the least I think people can do, whether you're sharing information and stuff as well. But I think from the perspective of a lot of people, especially around where us three grew up in this like white area, or predominantly white area, it's understanding what white privilege is and how lucky we are to kind of, well, it's not even, we shouldn't be lucky to have this position. That's the whole point of what this is. Understand what white privilege is. And yeah, people have responded to being white privileged before and being like, I'm not privileged, I grew up in a bad area and stuff. And that's nothing to do with white privilege. White privilege is the fact that you're white and you don't have to encounter the issues that, even as you said, Leon, the kind of small issues you undertake. Anyone who's white won't have to deal with that at all in their life. And it's, yeah, I mean, every person of color has a story or something that's happened to them over time. So it's a protesting and doing something to help is, I think, what needs to be done at this point, because this shouldn't, it's 2020, this shouldn't be a thing. I mean, how this has been going on since the beginning of time, kind of, well, since people have been around, is kind of crazy. And it's about time that things changed. At the end of the day, it's the least that needs to be done.
I thought a few things that were like interesting in the film that like resonate with people in real life. Like the idea, the fundamental idea of the film is like the hate you give, it's like thug life. The hate you give, was it infants, fucks everybody or something like that. The hate you give little infants fucks everybody. Like the idea by having these like kind of having these hateful feelings towards black kids from a young age and kind of writing them off only is exacerbating the problem, because they're going to grow up fueled by that hatred, and that's when they'll start acting out. And the thing I don't understand, it's so stupid, like what people don't understand, people, racist people don't seem to understand, is that why do you think black people, like when they'll be like, well, you shouldn't be committing crimes if you don't want to go to prison and stuff like that. Like, why do you think that happens? They don't ever stop. They just see the color of the person's skin and assume that that's why you're being a dickhead. It's like, no, because they've been shunted to call like underprivileged communities when they're not, like in the film, they're in that community that there's not a lot of jobs available. So you end up like drifting into like gang culture and dealing drugs and stuff. And that perpetuates itself. Like that's the problem, that's what happens. And so like that's just having that lifestyle, that leads to a minority of black people falling into the wrong crowd and committing crimes. And white people just they cast them all with the same brush and assume they're just acting out for no reason, when they don't even consider like the circumstances and stuff like that. And another thing was like, you have the protests towards the end where like obviously the protests are out of like frustration because another black kid has died for no reason, and the cop's about to walk free, like he's not going to get charged or anything. And like the police, people be like, you're not peaceful, the protests aren't peaceful. But when they say the protests aren't peaceful, it's like, so in the film, one of the police cars gets a baseball bat to the windshield. Like that's not advisable. That's not the worst thing in the world. People would like take the smallest bit of like, not even looting, just any kind of like hitting something or breaking something, and assume, okay, the peaceful protest has descended into violent protest now. So now the police can respond however they want to. So in the film, it's like the tear gas comes out straight away. Like it's a disproportionate response to what's actually going on. Like the racist people seem to think, no, peaceful protest, there can't be any fears. You just got to be on the streets. Even then they disagree. But like they've just got to stand there. They can hold their placards or whatever and sing songs. But any little thing, if there's someone has like a weapon or something to protect themselves, or if they break like a car's windshield, it's like, oh, okay, that means you can start shooting them, as if that makes any kind of sense. Mason, was that something you thought that was interesting in the film, particularly now seeing like there's been numerous videos on Twitter of police actually escalating the situation where protests start out fairly like calm and then they're escalated by the police's response. Was that something you thought that was interesting within the film?
Yeah, I think that sort of, I wish I'd watched the film before like the current situation that we're in right now, because when you're watching both side by side, you almost forget it's a film, because it literally feels like what you're watching on all these clips on Twitter, like you said, where the police just for no reason, or for like the most minor reason, will escalate the situation, start shooting rubber bullets at people, use tear gas, which it seems so unethical, because when you look at when you look, like, that's why we're so lucky to have stuff like Twitter, because we're able to see the other side that the media wouldn't show us, especially in stuff like that, because we could see that a protest wouldn't be aggressive, anything like that, as being like a standard protest, and yet, like you said, it will take the smallest thing for the police to use it as an excuse to escalate the situation and start like continuing like police brutality. Really, I've noticed as well, especially like in the UK, from what I've seen on Twitter and stuff like that, it's not so much the sort of whole idea of police brutality, but like you said about painting everyone with the same brush. You'll get one small act here during one of the protests, and then the whole protest will be branded as this like embarrassment. That I even saw a tweet today that if you were protesting out in London yesterday, you apparently don't care about the elderly and the NHS. And it's like, you can argue that case because we're in lockdown right now, but where was that energy when you had thousands of people on the beaches, or when you had people on Westminster Bridge clapping together, not 2 meters apart, when they were like supposedly celebrating the NHS, or during VE Day when loads of streets were getting together? Like, just because one's like classed as a protest, is so easy just to sort of brush it aside, and it invites the opportunity for the media and stuff like that to portray it as being this big like fuck up, basically. Like, even today I saw that on one of like the bollards or whatever it is in Birmingham, near the war memorial, someone had just spray painted something onto it, and as I saw it today, I was like, oh, for fuck's sake. Like, I can just tell that once like people on Twitter see this, or like more particularly like Facebook and stuff, I can just imagine them going on about how it's disrespectful and stuff like that. And it's so jarring to see, because it's like, why would you look at that one issue that someone has sort of created on a fully positive protest, and then switch that into being like, the whole thing is out of control, it makes no sense, blah, blah, blah. Like, and I feel like that just highlights people's racism and inability to comprehend like the weight and the importance of what's going on right now. And I think that in itself, it's just such a massive issue. Like, even when I try and raise that with people, when they're like, oh, look, they clearly have another agenda, blah, 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 stuff like that. And it's like, first of all, who's they? And at the same time, it's like, what possesses you to think this just through one act? And honestly, it's like beyond frustrating for me.
Yeah, like it's the double standards, really, because like, yeah, it's quite hard for me to like reconcile the idea that ultimately the protests and these mass gatherings are not what we wanted to be happening during the pandemic, but ultimately the government and other senior racists basically weren't saying nothing, with people breaching lockdown in big numbers for weeks, even probably more than a month, like in parks and stuff. People just doing the most on the beaches, especially in the last couple of weeks. As soon as there was like wind that lockdown would be a bit eased, people are straight onto the beaches, leaving their litter in there, which is another issue which we'll talk about another day. But yes, it literally is just a double standards. You're only calling it out now because it's an issue that you're afraid of, the idea of Black people having agency over their lives, and even like having loads of white people who've come out in support as well, like almost as if they're scared of that. So now they're going to pipe up, and this will definitely be everything. And if there's a second wave or anything like that, even if there's deaths, even if there's like bare deaths tomorrow, it will all be attributed to this, even though that doesn't even make sense scientifically, because who cares? The governments don't follow the science anyway. But it will all be attributed to these protests, because that's how it works. And that's like kind of an issue with some of the mainstream media as well, in how they report this situation. Back to the film as well, like I thought it was interesting, her ex, one of her ex like best friends, who she ends up turning on, who turns out to be one of those people who's like, all lives matter, basically. Essentially, she's like the substitute for that kind of mindset. Because then you've got like, she's part of like the kids at her school, where Star goes to that school. She has to like repress her Blackness, and now she's had the courage to speak up about a significant issue against her fellow students, those students are like happy to like appropriate the culture, because they mention a lot like the idea of them thinking they're Black, or you like embracing rap music or shit like that or whatever. And but now they're happy to appropriate the culture, but they don't respect it enough to speak out. Like even her boyfriend as well, at first doesn't really understand. Like he's not as evil and not a racist like the friend, but even he's like he doesn't really understand. Like he's like, I don't see color. There's no issue with race. But that's not confronting the actual issues that there are in the world. And then you have a friend who just can't stomach it, can't stomach her speaking out now. It's like, wait, what are you doing? She unfollows her on Tumblr, which Mason, you said like people have unfollowed you on Twitter and stuff like that, and like your housemate getting unfollowed on Instagram. Just the most petty people. It's like just come out and say you're racist in it. Might as well. Ross, what have you made of that kind of the response to the whole Black Lives Matter movement? That no, all lives matter. We should support all people.
I think it's possibly some of the most embarrassing things you'll see. When you're saying in a situation like this, all lives matter, you really have no understanding of what is actually going on in the world. Okay, yeah, all lives do matter, but in this moment, why do you give a fuck about that? I mean, there's like a passage in the Bible where I can't remember what passage or what, but there's 100 sheep, and one goes missing. So he leaves the 99 sheep to go find the one sheep, because that's the sheep that is in need at the moment. I mean, there's been loads of analogies of this, like there's a house burning down, and so the fire department had to go help that house, but then people from the other house in the street are like, what about my house? I mean, they all make sense though. It's basically what's going on. If you can't take yourself out of the equation for 2 minutes and notice what's going on, then you're part of the problem, realistically. But yeah, I mean, all lives, as I said, all lives do matter, but take 5 minutes at least to just notice that at the moment the problem is that it's Black people who are having an issue and that need the help. It's not hard to understand, and personally I don't understand why people can't understand that. But yeah, it's just a bit embarrassing, really.
Yeah, I think some of the analogies have been really, really good. In such a simple way. It's like if I've got 2 apples and Mason has 5, and then someone gives both of us 3, that's not given equality, is it? He'll just have another 3 and I'll have another 3, and we'll still be unequal. It's like simple. It's like that's all it is. It's like people who are underrepresented, who are discriminated against, they need support in this moment. So no one's, by saying Black Lives Matter, it's not saying that kill the other people, but that's just what racist people would like to infer. I think another thing that racist people would like call on to think looking back at the film is like Khalil. So when he is shot, like he reaches into the car, like you could tell he's frustrated because he's probably been pulled over multiple times in his life, because they just see the car and see the Black person in the car and assume, yeah, I need to pull him over. It's probably gonna be something dodgy. And a lot of police, it seems like in America, just relish the opportunity to antagonize and harass Black people. But in that scene, like when he's agitated, he takes his hands off the car, he looks into the car to get the comb. Like racist people be like even she says it in the film, actually, her racist friend is like, yeah, well, we could have been a gun. He couldn't see. It was dark at night. Even her Common, her like godfather, who's Black himself, says no. And he says as well, if it was a white person, there'd be nothing. It'd be just keep your hands up. But a Black person is like instinctive to assume the worst and shoot on sight. So like, yeah, just another aspect of this that's just so like frustrating. The people genuinely feel that the people who are on the other side will always like wrap themselves in circles, thinking of ways to like play devil's advocate and be like, well, no, they shouldn't commit these crimes, or they shouldn't look suspicious, or they should just respond to the police like politely, and nothing would happen to them. But it's like, well, if you're constantly being stopped for no reason, then why are you going to be calm about it? Another thing that was really powerful is just the start of the movie. Like with the camera starts off in like the neighborhood. I think there's like kids playing basketball. It's quite lively, and it like pans across, goes through the window to like the music stops, and it's like a serious conversation that this Black dad is having to have with. I think they were like 9 and 10, the 2 kids, and then the little baby as well. having to tell them, like, I think that, yeah, they call it the talk, quote unquote, like, this is what will happen. You're going to be stopped because of the color of your skin. You're going to be stopped by police, but it's just important. This is how you should act. You need to stay calm. You can't react, because if you react, the reality is you could end up dead, and that's why black people are protesting, because that's just completely ridiculous. And if the shoe was on the other foot, and that's how white people being treated, say if police just had that universal mentality to treat all potential suspects like that, they wouldn't be too pleased.
I think like what I really picked up on the film is that before, like as I started to watch it, I was like, I was almost like naive into believing that I sort of understood this whole issue, and that I was like not saying woke, but you know what I mean, like that idea that I was aware of like everything. And then this film just reminded me pretty much just of how naive I can be, especially like as a white person, into believing that I thought I understood the whole situation, because this film just brings light to so many issues, like you said about how at her school that's why I found like the narration, particularly in the film, really effective, because it was like she says, oh, if she uses slang, she's hood, but if the kids at her school use slang, they're hip. And it's like, that's obviously something that me as like within like my white privilege, I would never see that myself at school. I just presumed that people spoke the way they did, and it wasn't sort of looked at as being differently if someone else said it in that way. And I think the film has its strengths in promoting those sort of ideas and those stories, really, like where her dad is so like drilling on the idea of how you react when the police come to you, blah blah, and stuff like that. And you have some really like hard hitting moments in the film when you've got, well, first of all, the scene alone when the dad gets pulled out of the what is it, like the diner by the police, and then next thing you've got like his son, like his oldest son, getting like thrown on the ground asking for his ID and stuff like that. And you see how quickly like the situation can escalate. That was probably one of the hardest hitting parts of the film for me, because I was just like, it felt so real, and it seems stupid for me, like as a white person, say how it felt real, because realistically I will never experience anything like that myself. So the fact that the film could have that much of an effect on me is a credit to the film itself. And I was saying about sort of messages that the film promotes. After that scene when they go home and they're in the car, and I can't remember what the daughter says. I think she says like she apologizes for something, and the dad kicks off and is like, everyone get out of the car, blah blah. And I was like, what the fuck is going on? And he says about like the whole thug life thing, saying like we need to stand up to this, blah blah. Like, why would you apologize? You have nothing to apologize for. And yeah, it's just I'm so grateful that I watched this film, because at the same time as I was like naive and believing that I was educated, the film like reminded me clearly that I'm not, in so many aspects of the issues that are going on right now.
I think key line is when she says it to her white friend, like, you don't have to call me a nigger and spray me with a hose for you to be racist, or something along them lines. Like, I think we can like kind of focus a bit like on specifically on the UK. Like, that doesn't mean that's not what racism is. Like, that's not purely what racism is being that overt, being that aggressive. It's subtle things, like subtle attitudes. I saw one like status, like I think it's like I can't remember if it's all black people or specifically like Caribbean people or something. I think it's all black people, but like it's like 4 times more likely for black kids to be excluded from school and things like that. And even in like football, like Yaya Toure and Paul Pogba are like 2 of the most like technically gifted footballers of the last like 10-15 years, but they'll, in a lot of mainstream reporting and just by like general fans, they'll be talked about in terms of their like power, in terms of their speed, because that's how you try to define black people. They don't have intelligence in their ability. That's even though they clearly do, and that's a massive asset. That's a massive skill that the players like that have, because they're black. It's like, oh yeah, he's got great power, great speed, he's got a great engine, that kind of thing. Like, it's not something you'd notice or be like, oh, that's racist on my days. It's like it's just subtle things like that allow hateful attitudes to kind of permeate. I think one crucial thing, me and Mason talked about it, like they like what we're taught in history and how the UK is presented and how the British Empire is presented, which is, it's, when you think about it, it's actually ridiculous how there's literally, I don't think, is there any negativity in terms of, is the UK cast in any kind of negative light in the history that we learn? Like, I don't think so, when there's so many like heinous things that this country has done, and that this country's basically like bankrupted large corners of the world, and then they try to vote for Brexit and shut them out, even though they're kind of responsible for the inequality in large parts of the world. But even things like that I've learned from just like random videos from historians, like even as like near as like the 80s, like British, like the army and people like that would go into like the small nations in Africa and the Caribbean and raping the women and looting and shit like that. Like as only as recently as like 40 years ago, and that's stuff we're not taught about, and we're not taught about like Black history. Ross, do you think that's something that pretty much, because that's what the hate you give is talking about, is the idea that you're promoting hate towards kids from a young age. Therefore, if you educate these kids from a young age, they're going to grow up more tolerant, more understanding, and that can only benefit everyone.
I mean, yeah, I mean, everyone knows that the early years are some of the most important ones. I think it, especially from now onwards, it's so important for schools and educators just to drill this idea into children's minds that this is the past, this is what's happened, and it makes them aware. It will make people aware of what's happened in the past and realize what's so bad about it. I mean, I don't ever remember anything really about being taught about that kind of thing. I mean, you get taught a little bit about it. I think kind of the Jim Crow era. Maybe in GCSE history, if I might be wrong, but I mean, we've got to start learning about it from a younger age. I mean, GCSE is optional. Those people don't do history. It's primary school stuff should be learning this, telling young people how it is, how it was, and how it should be is possibly some of the most important things we've got to do moving forward across the world, not just in the UK. I think, especially America, need this kind of issue resolved, among others.
Because ultimately, that's how these attitudes kind of perpetuate in this country, because there's no like natural conscience for what the bad stuff that this country has done for hundreds of years. So kids are growing into adults and not really knowing that this country has done anything bad, and then you get a situation where they're manipulated by the government and people into voting for Brexit to exclude people from other countries. Still just like utterly stupid. Mason, have you got any thoughts on kind of what the history that's taught in this country?
Yeah, I think it's genuinely in need of like serious reform. And what's mad to me is that it didn't stick out to me whilst we was at school, and after choosing it as a GCSE and an A level, it was just accepted. I never even like considered the idea that we weren't learning such essential knowledge within our history lessons. And even like Ross said, considering their options for GCSE and A level is something that has to be taught within the earlier years. Like, tell me why when we're in year 7, 8, and 9, we have to learn about. I'm pretty sure we done a module on the Titanic, or we done a module on Jack the Ripper and the six people he killed. Like, realistically, what is the relevance of that in comparison to teaching like the younger generation of ideas of racism that are stemmed from our country's past and stuff like that? And I think it is genuinely something that needs reform. It was like even last night I was saying like I was trying to like rack my brain as to how I can use sort of my position to help. And me and my flatmate, we tried to make like this sort of like information thing on issues within the UK and how it's like its lack of innocence basically. And the main issue was about the education system, how it is. And I literally said myself that when an education system is flawed from the start, is when it doesn't offer students like the essential knowledge that it needs. And that's something that the UK needs to take more control over and embrace. Like, I just can't understand how we're always told that we're so great just because we live in Great Britain, and we have this sort of like superiority like idea in our heads because we used to own 1/4 of the land mass like on Earth or something. But you need to explain to people how we achieve that, and like the grim facts behind it. It's even silly things like the slave trade. We're accredited as being the ones to end it, but people seem to forget the whole idea that we was like one of the biggest players in the slave trade for years, for like 200, 300 years. Like, I don't understand how you can tell one end of the story, but not how you build up to that in the first place. And yeah, I think it's something that I'm sort of starting to understand, that I feel like really passionate about, and that does need change. So yeah, I think me and my flatmate were going to release, like I said, this thing on Instagram, sort of just trying to educate people, even in like the slightest manner, on it. And even within it, there's a petition to sign to reform the history education board. And yeah, I feel like it's something that I want to now like delve deeper into myself and try and understand why it's set up the way it is, but at the same time how you can improve that.
That's incredible, really. Like we dive into like the civil rights battle in America over like 50, 60 years. It's like, oh my days, what? There was segregation. Oh my days, it's like horrendous. And look at all these problems that they've still got today. And then we do apartheid in South Africa. It's like, oh my days, what? They're like, and even in South Africa, like black people are the majority, and they're still being oppressed. They were still being oppressed in this manner for so long. It's like, oh my god, how terrible. And then even as recently, probably as like maybe even like year 9 or 10, I'm like, wow, this Britain, this little island, took over such a vast amount of the world. Like, oh, it's a bit of a flex. Like, oh my days, because of the way we're taught it, and having not looked at any other outside information, just sat there as like a 13, 14-year-old or whatever, like, oh my days, what? Oh, that's mad. I just went out there and just took over the world without understanding the detrimental effects that had on so many countries, and how this country still hasn't like grappled with that. They're not even interested in grappling with that. They're interested in like isolating themselves, which is just incredible, really. So yeah, definitely needs reform in the education system. And just back to the film, finally for me, like I think there's a bit of dodgy acting in places, some like broad characters, and it can get a bit like melodramatic, and it's a bit like sanitized. Like it's not as gritty as this like subject matter could warrant. But I think in some ways that kind of makes it like more digestible for people, because it is like a bit more of like a breezy film, still with a powerful message. And then you have Stenberg, her performance is like just ridiculously good, like progressively seeing in her face the understanding the gravity of the situation, and slowly realizing, okay, I need to lend my voice to the conversation and try fight back, so that she kind of like steers you through like any like dodgy bits in terms of the actual like filmmaking. But I think the fact that it is a bit like sanitized, but still with that powerful message, kind of makes it easier for people to understand, and hopefully more people are. I think it made like 34 mil back in 2018. You'd hope people like on streaming or whatever are able to access it, because it is so relevant at the moment. Ross, have you got any final thoughts on the actual film?
Yeah, I mean, I think I said earlier, but it's just so weird watching it now, and it's thinking how relevant it actually is, and how, like, to today's situation, it's literally, I mean, that riots and stuff outbreaking due to a black person dying is literally what's happened today and within the last week or so. As I said, yeah, just kind of showing that America was kind of one kill away from breaking point. I mean, amongst the hundreds of people that have been killed, and this time it's resonated across the world. Obviously, riots and protests in the UK and other countries are going on at the moment, but the film itself sends a really good message, kind of telling you how much you don't know, how much you think you know before you watch it. You can read up on as much as you want, but this kind of it goes deeper into, especially from my perspective as a white person, kind of at least trying to put myself in the shoes of a black person. Of course, we'll never understand, but at least you can get a better kind of more personal level to the stories by watching this. And I would 100% recommend it to anyone, to everyone, really. I think the film needs to be more accessible, really. I had to watch it for I don't think it's on Netflix or anything, and it's like you have to buy it off Amazon. So I hope people can find ways to watch this, because it's definitely worth the watch and needs to be seen.
Mason, overall thoughts on the film?
Yeah, sort of reiterating what you two said. Like, I wish its accessibility was like easier to achieve, basically. But with the film itself, like I said, I think there is a few issues. Like I said, Anthony Mackie's character is not good in this film. I never really understood like the motives of his girlfriend either in the film. And I think I didn't want to be critical, to be honest, when I watched the film, because I was so sort of caught up in the reality of the situation within the film. But like you said as well, the performance from the lead is incredible. I'm not even sure how old she is, but I wouldn't essentially say she carries the film, but like what she does and like the journey you go through with her as she sort of comes to realize like what's happening due to what she's seen and stuff like that is really effective. And I think that the main family, the atmosphere they can create sort of on scene during certain parts of the film was so hard hitting for me. So fuck knows how it'd feel for someone else who has genuinely experienced issues like that themselves. So I think, yeah, the film, it could have its issues, but I think it's definitely a film, especially in like today's climate, you watch it and you don't want to see those issues. You just want to watch it and have a better understanding. I think that's what the film does so well. Like, this could easily be a film that could be put in like schools to watch and stuff like that. There's no reason for it not to be. And I think, like you said, the issues in the film allow it to be a bit more accessible, and it allows, like, instead of having to actively go out and search online to educate yourself, this alone could easily be a film just to open like narrow-minded people's eyes, or even just people who do want to sort of understand more. They could put this film on and get more of a gist of the whole situation. What I don't understand, like the thing that sort of shocks me the most is, as a white person, I thought that I would be able to almost access, like in my brain, a racist viewpoint, and almost be able to access, like, when I look at white people being so overtly racist and so vocal about how they feel, I almost try to view it from their perspective to try and understand why they're filled and like fueled with so much hatred. And I genuinely can't. I don't see how someone's brain can work in that way. And as like being the race that is like perpetuating and setting this example of racism, I just don't understand how you can have this mentality. And I honestly just can't. I really just can't understand it, because even like for me and like my personal experiences, my first primary school in London was very like multicultural, like loads of different like ethnicities and everything. And yet I didn't build up an intolerance or anything like that. For me, it allowed me to be more aware of everyone and allowed me to be, I don't want to say more accepting because that sounds awful. You should just be able to accept anyone. But I had no issues like that myself. And yet people from the similar areas to me have built up this mass sort of like hatred and racism in themselves. And yet we experience the same thing. So I don't understand how me as a child and then other people as children could grow up and have two completely different opinions. And for me, I don't know, I literally don't have words to be able to understand how people can be so vocal and so passionate about hating another race and just like being racist. Or like we said, the worst thing is people who don't understand that they're being racist. For me, it's like if I can give you an example of what you're doing is being racist, and yet you still can't comprehend that, and you throw excuses like, I'm not racist, I have black friends. If I was racist, I wouldn't have black friends. It's like, you're not understanding the point. Your actions are racist. And the whole fact that you can't understand what I'm saying to you, like, personifies that even more. And yeah, I don't know. I think like it's really mad to me. Like, I feel like it's something I could genuinely speak for hours about. I don't know, like, Ross, how do you feel, like, as a white person as well? How do you feel about other white people being the example of racism? can you even begin to like comprehend as to why people have this like mad viewpoint, especially how we've grown up in the same area, and like you said, we've seen on stuff like Facebook and Twitter, people being so vocal and just not being able to understand the current climate. I feel like I have more of an exposure because of where I lived before. But how do you feel about like living like your entire life in like a predominantly white area?
It still just doesn't make sense to me. Like, as much as anyone could try and put their self into the mindset of someone who does this, it still could never ever make sense. Obviously, you've got some people out there who are just kind of doing it to be that person, just to trigger people, and they're obviously part of the issue. But it's really sad to know that there's some people out there that genuinely mean what they're saying. I think, yeah, a lot of the times there is people who don't realize that they're doing it, who think what they're saying is fine. I suppose in those cases, those people probably won't get their minds changed, but it's so hard to comprehend like what mindset people have to be in to do this. Yeah, it's kind of hard to know what to stump for words, kind of trying to put yourself in that mindset, because you just can't. Yeah, it's really hard to know what to say about that kind of mindset. I mean, as you say, I grew up in this predominantly white area, so and like even then I still can't, why would I have an issue with it? It's just, I mean, it's kind of cringy as it sounds. Underneath your skin, everyone's the same, aren't they? It's just how it is, and judging someone because of the color of their skin, it doesn't make any sense at all. It literally doesn't. And I think anyone with the right mindset would agree with that.
Yeah, I think like the political situation in the West in the last like 4 or 5 years just hasn't helped at all. Like a combination of Brexit and Trump's presidency, like both those things have just been designed to divide people. But nothing about Brexit or the way Trump operates as a leader was designed to unite people. It was all about like taking sides and being hostile towards people who disagree with you. And both of those things have like engendered feelings of hatred towards like immigrants. Like thinking about Brexit specifically, like being told like, yeah, these people are coming over here and taking your jobs, and this is why you're struggling economically, is because of these people coming over here. That kind of language from people in senior positions within government, and now one of them's the prime minister, has like a myriad of examples of when he's been overtly racist. And even when he's not even overtly racist, it's just the language that you use, like when he says like pickaninnies, and like the calling Muslim women, that was like slits or something like that, slitty eyes for Chinese people, shit like that. Yeah, letterboxes, yeah, shit like that. Like if you're not conscious of the language you're using, like how do you think retarded people in some of the parts of this country are gonna respond like that if they see the highest office in the land using that kind of language? How do you think that's going to affect the way they view the country, the way they view the world? And the same thing with Trump. Like it's just all been about, that's just mad. Like, he's the president of the country, and it's all been about dividing people. It was never about being a leader. And so it was inevitable. This like anarchy was going to happen because it was just constant like fake news saying they're lying about this, they're cheating, whatever. Like it was all about dividing people. So it's just inevitable. I think this was all going to come to a head, and here it is. And it's hard to envision a way back. And even now in this situation with COVID and with all these riots, there's still, they've got like 30 days before. So there's like another Brexit deadline in like 30 days to do something. It's like, imagine actually still going, obviously it probably is going to happen, still going through with that now. And they all know like it's going to have a negative impact economically, at least in the short term. People like the strong Brexiteers feel like in like 30 years, it'll provide an upturn. It's not really what you need right now. They're openly admitting like you'll have slower, like in terms of getting goods from overseas, it'll be more delayed. And obviously overall, we're just going to suffer financially in the short term, which seems utterly insane when the world is fucked already. But yeah, has anyone else got anything they want to say before we wrap up?
What would you say, Leon, to like me and Ross and other people of privilege? What would you say we should be doing, or we could do to help promote sort of causes like Black Lives Matter, or just in general what we can do to sort of combat this racism, but more so obviously specifically that stems from white like households and white people?
I don't really know, to be honest. Like, I feel like everyone just keep signing all these petitions that are coming up. Because hard, if you don't have a platform, I think it's on people with millions of, with not even that, like thousands, tens of thousands, 100,000 followers on Twitter or Instagram. Like, it's on them to be a force for good at this point, ultimately. But if you don't have a platform, I think as long as you're just staying educated, staying connected to what's going on in the world, not following the lead of corrupt, like morally bankrupt politicians, and just understanding, trying to doing your best to understand people, watching all these videos that come out of Twitter of real life people who are experiencing struggle. I'm not experiencing any kind of struggle, so even I have to like try understand what it's actually like to be a colored person who's persecuted, because I've never had to experience anything like bad in my life thus far. So it's like an education for me as well. I think it's hard for like we're just normal people to really make a difference. But like, go to the protest is like amazing. Like I'm not brave enough at this point to go to a protest. I just don't really, like, a bit scared of getting ill, to be really honest. I'm not really. So I'm not. I can't. In any other period, I'd be like, calm, go out there, because you're not gonna get persecuted for that. I don't care what people think. But like, I don't really want to get ill. That's just on me. So I respect anyone who's willing to go do that, like you guys. But no, other than that, just being understanding and keep pushing for this change. I think, like we said, like the education thing, I feel like that is almost like the most important thing in terms of like a long-term like resolution. Just because it is ridiculous how this country doesn't delve into its darker past, and until they do that, then we'll never be able to combat the issues that exist in the present. So I think that's it. Okay, I think that's quite an interesting discussion, worth doing, even if no one listens. Still quite cathartic to be able to speak about some important stuff in the world. So I won't do any kind of big sign off. Just say thanks guys for joining me, and see you on the regular podcast.
Bye.
Cheers, Abel.